My Bible is open to Isaiah chapter 40. The vast majority of that chapter will be our text this evening. We're going to be jumping into verse 9. If you do read the first 8 verses, there ought to be a whole lot of that sounds really familiar. The New Testament does work with a number of those passages, some of which we have recently looked at in our Wednesday night study on the life of Christ as we consider the prophecy of John the Baptizer coming and proclaiming the way. Isaiah is going to work with that in verses 3 through 5 there, but we're going to begin in verse 9 here in just a moment. So I hope that you will open up your Bibles there so that we can get into our God's Word together. It is good to see everyone out this evening. Always a wonderful thing when we can be together and worship our God with one another. As we get into Isaiah 40 this evening, I have labeled this chapter the same thing in the past. I find that the label still works really well. No additional study has led me to think that I really think we need to stick a different title on this to encapsulate everything that's going on in this chapter. No, I think as we read through this chapter and see all of the things that are happening in it, to call this God's comforting might is an excellent title for this chapter. As we step into this chapter, we're kind of hitting a breaking point in Isaiah. Previous to this, he's done a lot more work concerning Assyria and everything that they have been doing. He's dipped into Babylon just a little bit, but coming into 39 and on into 40 here, he is going to move forward in history, and he's going to be looking at those of Judah who are going to be in Babylonian captivity, and he's going to be offering some comfort to them when they are in this place. I guess as I can move forward here on the screen and we work in that concept of God offering comfort to them, that we will see it's really an interesting source of comfort that he uses here. If we can jump into verse 9. Going up to a high mountain, O Zion, herald of good news. Lift up your voice with strength, O Jerusalem, herald of good news. Lift it up, fear not. Say to the cities of Judah, behold your God. As we think about trying to comfort someone, as we think about someone in a difficult position, in a painful place in life, what kind of things do we tell them? What kind of comfort do we offer? Sometimes we might say something like, hey, it's all going to be okay. Everything's going to be all right. I know it's in a rough place right now. We're going to get past the rough place. And in the end, everything is going to come out okay. And it's really interesting. That is not the comfort that God offers to them. He says, you go up to the mountain and you make this your declaration of comfort. And if you will go back to verse 1, you will see that God is offering comfort. Comfort my people, says your God. And coming here into verse 9, as he's offering comfort, he says, behold your God. You want comfort? You want some consolation in a difficult place? Look at God. Behold him. That is comfort. Look at him. Look who he is and look how he acts. Verse 10. Behold, the Lord God comes with might, and his arm rules for him. Behold, his reward is with him, and his recompense before him. He will tend his flock like a shepherd. He will gather the lambs in his arms. He will carry them in his bosom, and gently lead those that are with young. He says, you want comfort? You behold God. Behold his coming. Behold his strength. Behold his power. Behold comfort. Now, because of this, I do want to point out that you use something like everything will be all right. We might use a passage like Romans, that all things work out for good for those who love the Lord. Does that mean everything is good? No. Does that mean when it all comes out to the end, it will be good for those who love the Lord? Absolutely. Why is that? Because those who love the Lord are looking at him. Those who love the Lord can find their comfort in him, because that's where comfort is. That is the source of comfort. And that's what God points his people to here. And we need to recognize and see that as he tells them, don't stop looking at me. You're going to be in a place of great difficulty. You're going to be in a place of terrible hardship. Don't stop looking at me. Do not stop beholding me, because, as we come into verse 12, this is my strength. This is my might. I think this is a wonderful, wonderful passage. Who has measured the waters in the hollow of his hand, and marked off the heavens with a span, enclosed the dust of the earth in a measure, and weighed the mountains in scales, and the hills in a balance? Here's our God. Here is the one that you are to look at, to behold his strength, to behold the size, quote unquote, of his strength, of his might. He says that he has measured the waters in the hollow of his hand. Here's the concept there. God cups his hands together, and the oceans are held within his hand. They are measured within his hand. He has marked off the heavens with a span. That means he holds his hand up next to the universe, and the width of his hand, or the length of his hand, says God has measured the heavens in that way. He has enclosed the dust of the earth in a measure, which is to say, he takes all the dust of the earth and he measures it as easily as we do when we're cooking. Something calls for a cup of sugar, and you pop that cup in there and you pull out a cup of sugar. It says, this is God with the dust of the earth. He's able to take that measure and he just pops it into the earth, and he measures all of the dust of the earth. He weighs the mountains in scales and the hills in a balance, which is, that is the most straightforward one. He is able to weigh the mountains and the hills, but to really see the size being brought out in this language, you imagine here is this scale where you set a weight on one side and then the object you're weighing on the other. And God just pops them mountains right up and sets it on the scale, sets it on the mountain. This is what he does with the mountains and the hills. This is the size of our God. This is how big our God is. And so, after he comes to verse 12, it's, oh, verse 9 makes a ton of sense. Where is comfort? Comfort is in looking at God. Comfort is in looking at this one who is so large. These descriptions, figurative, just so that we can see his size, but these descriptions are to see his grandeur and to know I can trust that might. I can trust his strength. He's big enough for it, and I can take comfort in that. I was telling Sister Geraldine just before services here, I really wanted to pair this with this morning's sermon so that we can see the connection in thought here as we talk about trusting in God's strength, as we talk about saying, you know what, I am weak, but my God is strong enough. And we come to a verse like verse 12. Is my God strong enough? Absolutely, my God is strong enough. And I can take great comfort in the fact that wherever I am in life, whatever I am doing in life, that if I will put my trust and my faith in God, he has the strength, the size of verse 12, to do exactly what he has promised that he will do for me. But now let's press forward into verses 13 and 14. Who has measured the Spirit of the Lord? Or what man shows him his counsel? Whom did he consult? And who made him understand? Who taught him the path of justice and taught him knowledge and showed him the way of understanding? As Isaiah considers the vastness of God, as he talks about how big God is, and we look at his strength, he steps into talking about God's wondrous wisdom, and he asks these series of rhetorical questions to make the point about God not having to consult man for knowledge. We'll come to a part of what I said there in just a moment, that God didn't consult anyone, but these rhetorical questions set forth this idea of, who did God have to consult to be wise? Who did God have to come to so that even as he had great might, that he would have great wisdom? So he asked these questions. Who has measured the Spirit of the Lord? Or what man shows him his counsel? Who has come up to the measure of God's wisdom and been able to put a ruler upon that and says, I get it in its entirety. I tell you what, I myself am big enough to hold up a ruler to the wisdom of God. Or, he asked, what man would show him his counsel? I'm so big, I'm here to teach God wisdom. What's that next question? Whom did he consult? And who made him understand? Who was the one that would teach him his wisdom? Who was the one who would teach him how to be the God that he is? Who taught him justice? Who taught him knowledge? Who showed him the way of understanding? Of course, Isaiah is making the point, not a person. No one showed him these things. No one taught him these things because he is big enough. He is so big and so mighty. These things are of him, and he did not have to consult man to have the wisdom that he has. Let's look at verse 15. Behold, the nations are like a drop from a bucket, and are accounted as the dust on the scales. Behold, he takes up the coastlands like fine dust. God doesn't consult man for his knowledge and for his wisdom. what man is like to him, like the nations are like to him, they are like a drop from a bucket. Tiny, insignificant. And I really like this phrasing. And they are accounted as the dust on the scales. When I go to the doctor's office and they're getting ready to weigh me, I take my phone, my wallet, and my keys out of the pocket because that's a few extra pounds I don't need to be showing up on that scale. You come home and you have a scale in the kitchen. You weigh out food on, and there's some dust on it. Do you wipe that dust off because it's going to affect the weight? You might wipe it off because you don't want it on your food, but do you wipe it off because it's going to affect the weight? No. That dust is not going to add anything to the weight. That's what God says the nations, that men are like to him in teaching him wisdom. You don't even account for the dust on the scales because it's so insignificant. It adds nothing to the scale at all, to the degree that you do not have to get rid of it for it to be a balanced scale. I don't go to man for knowledge. Man is like dust on the scale. It is, he is, they are nothing. Like a drop from the bucket, how much area does that water cover? Nothing. That is what man's knowledge and man's wisdom is to God. Man could give God absolutely everything that he had, and it doesn't add up to what God has. Verse 16. Lebanon would not suffice for fuel, nor are its beasts enough for a burnt offering. You will remember Lebanon was famous for its cedars, for its trees. He says the entire area of Lebanon, you could burn every single one of those trees, and that's not enough fuel. You could offer up every animal that's there, and it's nothing. You could give all of that, and it doesn't take care of the problem. The problem isn't fixed by man's wisdom, by man's thinking. The problem is fixed by God's wisdom that he did not have to consult any man for. But then we come to verse 17, and if being accounted as dust on the scales was something, 17 gets as strong as it can get. All the nations are as nothing before him. They are accounted by him as less than nothing and emptiness. How you like that? You could have just stopped at nothing. Like, okay, I get the point. Nothing. We've really driven that home. And Isaiah, God through Isaiah shows us, let me really drive the point home here. Less than nothing. Not only nothing, that's enough. Less than nothing. Who did God consult? God didn't consult anyone. Whose power is at play? Whose wisdom and knowledge is at play? Not man's. God's is at play. God's is at work. It is his strength and his might. He is the one that verse 12 describes. And then we come to who God can be compared to, or rather who God cannot be compared to, if we're to be really explicit. Verse 18. To whom then will you liken God? Or what likeness compare with him? An idol, a craftsman cast it, and a goldsmith overlays it with gold, and cast it for silver chains. He who is too impoverished for an offering chooses wood that will not rot. He seeks out a skillful craftsman to set up an idol that will not move. Here's this great God. Here is this one of this wondrous strength with this amazing knowledge and wisdom. And who would you compare him to? Who would you think to begin to compare him to? And Isaiah, working with Judah, who's got a really big problem with idolatry, oh, you want to compare him to an idol? You want to think you can worship these two beings as if there's some kind of equivalence between them? Absolutely not. You think you can compare them to an idol? Well, let's think for a moment what an idol is. You have a craftsman. He's going to take some gold and he's going to fashion it into an image, and you have your idol. He may put this silver chain upon it. He may fashion an idol out of the silver. And if you're not rich enough to afford him fashioning it out of gold and silver, maybe you can find you a really nice piece of wood. A piece of wood that isn't going to rot. And you can find a craftsman to create it, that he will shape it and put it in place so that it will not move. That's what an idol is, Isaiah says. You think there's any comparison of this thing to the God of verse 12? Who measures the universe with his hand, who's able to cut the oceans into his hand, takes his measuring cup down and measures the dust of the earth, who is so immensely great and powerful. And Isaiah says, cannot compare the two. An idol takes a craftsman. An idol takes being created, whereas God is not created. He creates. Verse 21. Do you not know? Do you not hear? Has it not been told to you from the beginning? Have you not understood from the foundations of the earth? Now we're going to have to carry this all the way down to verse 26 to put the entire thought together here. But Isaiah opens up with this thought of, don't you know this? Of course you know this. Haven't you heard this? Of course you have heard this. What I am about to tell you about God is not some unknown thing among you and among your people. What is to be known about God is a well-known fact. Now we press forward, verse 22. It is he who sits above the circle of the earth, and its inhabitants are like grasshoppers, who stretches out the heavens like a curtain and spreads them like a tent to dwell in. What is well known about God? The people of the earth are like grasshoppers to him. He dwells in the heavens, far above the people of the earth. To see his greatness as he sits in this place, and the people's being so small, a peoples who should be so subordinate to him. Verses 23 and 24. Who brings princes to nothing and makes the rulers of the earth as emptiness. Scarcely are they planted, scarcely sown, scarcely has their stem taken root in the earth, when he blows on them and they wither, and the tempest carries them off like stubble. You take these people of power, you take princes, and you take kings, and God says, they're absolutely nothing. I blow on them and they fall over as nothing. Their power, their might means literally nothing. If we go back to some earlier language, I find it just as applicable here. Less than nothing, God says. And then we come to 25 and 26. To whom then will you compare me, that I should be like him, says the Holy One. Lift up your eyes on high and see. Who created these? He who brings out their host by number, calling them all by name, by the greatness of his might, and because he is strong in power, not one is missing. You take anything deemed to have power, whether that be their worship of these idols or their consideration of these princes and kings that God says he brings to nothing, and they're not God, cannot be compared to God, and he cannot be compared to the idols because he is not created. It takes a craftsman to make them, but he is the creator. He looks to his creation and calls it by name. He has authority over his creation. It is his creation. God, the God of verse 12, cannot be compared to anything, because he is the God of verse 12, this might and this strength, and as we press past verse 12, this wisdom, it is his and comes from him. And then we come to his having this strength, his having this wisdom, his being God the Creator. His justice cannot be questioned. Verse 27. Why do you say, O Jacob, and speak, O Israel, my way is hidden from the Lord, and my right is disregarded by my God? Judah comes and asks the question. Tell you what, God is supposed to be treating me differently. You notice the wording of the question. Why has my right been disregarded? As a child of God, I have the right to be treated in a particular way. Putting it into the bondage situation here, the bondage context, could you imagine being in Babylon, being held in captivity by this foreign nation, and you say, I'm a child of God, I have the right not to be in this captivity. Why has God disregarded my right? He's not treating me the way he's supposed to be treating me here. And then we come to the rest of the chapter that I've boiled down to. God knows exactly what he's doing. God knows exactly where this is going. Verse 26. Or I suppose that I need verse 28. Have you not known? Have you not heard? The Lord is the everlasting God, the creator of the ends of the earth. He does not faint or grow weary. His understanding is unsearchable. Once more, he returns to their knowledge. You may recognize that verse in a song that we sing quite often. He comes and he says, don't you know? This is God. Don't you know he is this one? He is the everlasting God. He is the creator of this world. He knows what he is doing. Once more, as you consider his might and consider who he is as God, he is untiring, and his understanding is unsearchable. Once more, going back to that previous thought, he didn't get it from man, did not get it from people. There's no man comes up with the ruler and says, all right, I've got it all figured out and I've got God's wisdom just perfectly measured here. No, it says that his understanding cannot be searched out, never going to plumb the depths of the wisdom and the understanding of God, never going to be able to outrun him, outthink him, overpower him. He is untiring. He is the God and creator of this world. He is, verse 29, he gives power to the faint, and to him who has no might, he increases strength. He is the one who gives power to the powerless. He is the one who gives strength to those who would wear out. And then Isaiah makes a really cool pairing here as he works with verse 29, and he thinks about those who would be powerless as those who would not have the vigor of themselves. And then he comes to verse 30, where we may think, okay, what about those who aren't exactly powerless? What about those who would have power? Well, verse 30, even youth shall faint and be weary, and young men shall fall exalted. Think about those who generally we think, I tell you what, there ain't a whole lot of powerlessness to them, not a whole lot of weary to them. I've heard a number of people say it about Tara. I have found myself repeating it. Man, sure wish I had half of her energy. And I'll tell you what, come about noon, 12:30, 1 o'clock, and Tara's in bed sleeping. Tara takes a nap because even with all that energy, even the youth grow weary. Even the young men get faint. Verse 30 says, those who we might think, oh, there's power there. And God says, not endlessly. They get tired. They get weary. But do you know what I, God, am capable of doing? Verse 31. But they who wait for the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings like eagles. They shall run and not be weary. They shall walk and not be faint. Those prone to energy will get weary. But if you'll follow me, God says, if you will wait on me, you will trust in me, I'll renew your strength. I will make you strong again, and you will not be weary. So I can kind of connect all of this back together. I've run through this point by point within these verses here. I'm afraid I've not done a good enough job making the connections here about how this deals with Judah's question and Judah's accusation there of, God, you're disregarding me. You are not treating me properly. So let's take God's answer in its entirety here and see God working with that. First, God says, I'm God. I am your creator, and I know what I'm doing. How can you think that I am disregarding you? I am God, and I am acting properly. 2, you don't understand. You cannot search out my wisdom. You do not. How can you make this accusation against me when you can't even plumb the depths of my wisdom? How can you make this accusation when you can't begin to wrap your mind around me as God? 3, he says, I know as we talk about captivity, you're in a bad place. I know as we talk about being in a bad place, you think that you've been disregarded. You think that I have mistreated you. But let me end with this assurance. Put your faith in me. Put your comfort in me. Behold your God, the God of verse 12. And put your faith in this promise. When you're feeling powerless, I will give you power. If you think you're someone who does not need power, when you come to the place of recognizing I don't have enough power, I can give you power. I can give you renewal if you will wait on me. If you will stop uttering the accusations of verse 27 and thinking that I am disregarding you, if you will stop uttering the accusations of turning your back on me, if you will recognize me as the God of power who is able to strengthen and carry you forward, I'll renew you. And you will not be weary. I hope that helps us to see how these things connect back to verse 27, but using that then to work toward our closing this evening. I hope that helps us to see what our God is capable of doing for us. I don't have it on the screen, but if you will, flip with me to 1 Corinthians 15. This is a common passage. I think we are really, really familiar with it, but I think it's helpful in connection here as we think about what our God is able to do for us. 1 Corinthians 15 and verse 58. Therefore, my beloved, actually, let's do 57 as well. But thanks be to God who gives us the victory through our Lord Jesus Christ. Therefore, my beloved brothers, be steadfast, immovable, always abounding in the work of the Lord, knowing that in the Lord your labor is not in vain. Take that phrase. Always abounding in the work of the Lord. Now, I think we understand exactly what abounding means. Your cup overflows. That's abounding. There is more in the cup than has to be in the cup. And he says, always abounding in the work of the Lord. And sometimes we read that and we say, but I'm tired. I've been doing the work, but I'm not Colton's age. I'm not, maybe I can say this one, Tara's age. And I'm tired. always abounding in the work of the Lord, always given over to Him and to His work. And here's where we make more connection to this morning. I am tired. I am weak. I am flesh that fails. But what did we just learn? Isaiah 40. In a place of difficulty, in a place of hardship, in a place of being surrounded by the enemy, in a place of faith being put through the fiery furnace so that it can come out the other side pure. What do? We say, I'm tired, and give up? Or do we come back to the God of Isaiah 40 and verse 12? Do we come back to beholding our God and taking strength in Him and being steadfast, being immovable, always abounding in His work? Because when we come to that day of saying that I have finished the course, I have run the race, we're going to find ourselves right here. I made it to the end because my God gave me the strength. We make it to the end because our God gives us the strength, and from this day to that day, that's always, from this day to that day, abounding in His work. Where are you at this evening? Are you trusting in the strength of the Lord? Are you tired, weary, ready to give up maybe? Trust in the Lord. Wait on the Lord. Give yourself over to the Lord. Put your faith in the Lord and in the strength that He would give us, that we might be about His work. If you're not walking with Him this evening, if you are not trusting in Him and in His way, I would implore you. I keep coming back to it because it really is key. Isaiah 40 and verse 12. And you look to the God, the great God, and the size of the God that we are not giving ourselves over to. If you're not walking with Him this evening, won't you change that? If there is anything at all that we can do to help you in your walk with God, won't you come forward while we stand and sing the song selected? The voice of the